Good afternoon, everyone. The informal meeting of the Commission for Social Development is called to order. This meeting is held using remote simultaneous interpretation. I kindly ask participants to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working remotely and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. Participants may select the preferred language to hear the interpretation or choose the non option, to hear the original language of the speaker. Speakers will not be able to unmute their microphones or engage their video until given the floor. If you have any face, audio, or video issues during the meeting, please use Restart All Lines button, which is above the microphone icon. Should the problem persist, please reload your browser. For technical support, you may also send a private message to the moderator of the platform. Having said that, we can now begin our interactive dialogue with senior officials. Following the 8th of February meeting, today, senior officials of the United Nations system will be informing us about activities carried out recently to contribute to guaranteeing a just transition towards through digital technology in the broad context of their various entities in the United Nations. The main aim of the dialogue today is to have an exchange of ideas on current trends, good practices, innovative approaches, and experience gained at regional level to strengthen the United Nations system support to member states in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Dear colleagues, dear panelists, it's really a pleasure to be able to chair this panel with such distinguished members of the system, and I'm sure we'll benefit from the contributions of all speakers to enrich our thinking about digital technologies in social development. As I indicated in my quality as chair at the opening session, the pandemic is much more than a disease that has taken lives. It has shown us the insufficiencies of a system. The pandemic took lives, but it took jobs, it took whole lives. It showed us the problem of inequality. And when we speak about inequality, we have to bear in mind the various digital divides that we have been exposed to between countries, between generations, between the younger and older generations, and between people living in urban centers and rural areas. If we want to address this and the issue of digital inclusion, we have to, first of all, look at those that are excluded, those that cannot have access because they don't have digital access. And in this segment, we can particularly debate the challenges of digital inclusion that some regions are facing, in particular, some people in situations of vulnerability, such as women and children, that have very many intersectional forms of discrimination, and those with disabilities. As I said, I'm now happy to welcome the various panelists. Madam Alicia Bárcena, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. Madam Armida Salcia Al-Shibana, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Mr. Ho-Lin Zhao, Secretary General of the International Telecommunication Union. Madam Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, Sustainability and Partnerships of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, and Mr. Gerard Quinn, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I'm also pleased to welcome the moderator, Mr. Elliot Harris, Assistant Secretary General of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Before I hand over the floor to Mr. Harris, I wish to remind panelists to please keep to their allocated time limit, which is 7 minutes per presentation, and delegations to keep within the 3-minute time limit during the interactive discussion. And remember that we have interpretation until 5 p.m. and I think that it can really be a very enriching debate, particularly given what we're discussing today. I now turn the meeting over to Mr. Harris to conduct the interactive dialogue with senior United Nations officials on the priority theme, and I look forward to a productive and interesting exchange of views. Mr. Harris, you have the floor.
Which makes my job as moderator significantly easier. We're gathered here today to talk about the reactions and the changes that have overtaken us all in response to this crisis, and what we in the UN system have done and count on doing in the coming months to help our member states, to help the global population respond to what is perhaps the most significant challenge that most of us will have faced in our lifetimes. This is indeed a truly universal crisis. It affects us all countries, all individuals. This health crisis has gotten into all corners of the globe in a way that no other crisis has done before. But as you said, Madam Chair, this is a crisis that affects us all differently. Some population groups are much more susceptible to infection than others. And while some of us have been able to switch to online work and to socially distance ourselves with relative ease, many others have had to continue to expose themselves to infection in order to earn a living, if they have a job at all. And that is, I think, one of the distinguishing characteristics of this crisis. It is an inequitable crisis. The impact is very unevenly distributed. And looking forward, we have to be aware that the challenges will not be resolved the moment we've managed to vaccinate everyone. In responding to the crisis, for example, we find that the process of digitalization has accelerated, and that's accentuated many of the already worrisome digital divides, as you yourself mentioned earlier, Madam Chair. The nature of jobs is changing rapidly as automation spreads itself even further, and that is threatening to leave many, many more people behind and disadvantage even larger groups. Each country, each region, each economic sector, each social group has experienced the crisis in a different way and to a different degree. And as we respond, we have to bear in mind that each group, each country, each individual has a different capacity to respond. And we have to take that into account to ensure that our recovery not only responds to the disruptions of the economy or of the society, but that we also take the opportunity here to resolve some of these underlying weaknesses that this crisis has exposed and that we have left unaddressed for far too long. Our panel this afternoon is, I think, uniquely placed to share with us some of the different perspectives on the various faces of this crisis and the impact that it has been having. And I don't need to repeat, the introductions that you so kindly gave of our distinguished panelists. I would like to recall again, as you have done, Madam Chair, that we do want to stay to the allocated time limits. And I do want to apologize in advance if I have to interrupt the speakers, just to recall that there is a time limit that we have to respect given the time that's allotted for our session today. I also hope that we leave enough time for all who wish to participate to ask questions or to share their views to have the opportunity to do so. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to the first of our panelists, my good friend Alicia Bárcena Ibarra, who is the Executive Secretary of ECLAC in Santiago. Alicia, you have the floor.
Elliot Harris, in the first place, I want to quiero agradecer muy especialmente.
I would like very much to thank Maria del Carmen Skev, our dear Argentinian ambassador and chair.
Congratulate her for this session and thank her more especially. I'm going to speak in English for ease of interactive dialogue, which I think is what I was requested to do. Happy to share with Armida, Jaulín, Anita Batia, and Gerard Quinn. Let me tell you, Elliot, that as you said, and many people have said, these pandemics has shown us a lot of lessons. But one of them is that in our region in particular, we are facing both structural gaps that we have been accumulated for many years that are related to inequality. This region is defined by inequality. income, wealth, you name it. But this is a region of inequalities. And second, I think we have to bear in mind that this is a region of very low productivity that needs to be enhanced. And of course, this pandemic has been one of supply and demand, and has brought forward, I guess, a very, I would say, a very complicated reality. First of all, a very uncertain scenario, unpredictable future that will require very assertive policies. So let me turn immediately to the topic of this session, which I think is digital inclusion. And I want to tell you what is going on in Latin America and the Caribbean, because we have done a very, I would say, important diagnosis, but also a very concrete set of proposals to promote digital citizenship. Because today, digital is part of the welfare, of the basic needs of people. And therefore, the benefits are very unequally now available. And we have done a very, as I said, thorough study about this. And we can tell you that 2/3 of the population have access to internet in our region, mainly through mobile broadband. We're talking about 67.5%. However, 40 million households are not connected. And these represent really a huge gap. And we are talking about 33% of these households are in cities, 77% are in rural areas. Now, what is the inequality here? Is that 75% of the richest households have access to internet, but the lowest quintile of income distribution, only 35% are connected. And what are we calculating here in Latin America and the Caribbean? We are calculating a couple of things. First of all, how much does the mobile and fixed broadband services represent in terms of total income? So we know that in this region, 14% of the total income has to be devoted to mobile broadband, and 12% is devoted to mobile. 14% to fixed broadband, and 12% to mobile broadband. So this is very difficult, because when we compare, and we have done this for for 9 countries of the region, we have done a very thorough analysis showing that the women in particular, are the ones that do not have an income themselves. They don't have an autonomous income. So these women who do not have access to the proportion of women without an income of their own, we're talking about 40% of the women do not have an income of their own. And if the cost of the broadband and the mobile broadband is already representing that much of their income, and they don't have an income, well, the women are the ones who are left behind in these inequalities. But the other problem we have is the velocity, the capacity, because the other thing is the speed connection limits, because only 44 of the countries of the region cannot and did not reach the downloading speed that allows several online applications. So if you have a household that is studying and working and so forth, they cannot do it. They don't have that capacity. So what is going on then is that we have 32 million of children between the ages of 5 and 12 years old that are not participating in distance learning. Therefore, we're talking about 46% of the children of this region that are not having access to teleeducation. And 21% of the activities in this region cannot be done by teleworking. So that's another very important thing. So we are talking here about connectivity, but also the velocity, the access. Let me turn very quickly, because I know you're going to stop me at some point. What are the key things that we propose? Number one, we are suggesting a digital basket, a basic digital basket, and we have calculated how much how much does this digital basket costs for country by country. So, and the average cost of a digital basket is 1% of GDP. That's the cost of the basic digital basket, which will include a laptop, a low-cost connection, and we have done an analysis of, as I said before, 11 countries. We have calculated how much it will cost, and we are doing for all the region, which is 33 countries. And we know that if there is digital inclusion, but of course there is a lot of heterogeneity, because the cost in Bolivia is 7% of GDP, in Mexico is 1%, in Chile is 0.3% of GDP. But the most
Half
important
a minute, Alicia.
Sorry?
Half a minute, please.
Yes. So the most important thing is how many women will be benefited, and we know that 1 of 4 women will be benefited by this basic digital basket. Number 2, we are suggesting that in the sphere of education, we really have to put a lot of technology in all the schools, and we have to offer digital transformation. So it's essential, the basic digital basket that has to be there. And secondly, we are suggesting, and we have already calculated, an emergency basic income for 6 months and for 1 year, which will also be very important for all the households in the region. And this emergency basic income is equivalent to 1 line of poverty, which will allow our households to be included at all rates. Let me stop here, Elliot, and of course, I am at your disposal to discuss these proposals, very concrete proposals that we are making but of course, priority should be given to women. That is something that we want to underline. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And I must say I was gripped by that concept of digital citizenship, which elevated in many respects to a right that people need to have if they are going to participate fully and inclusively in our societies. Let me turn now to our second panelist, Amira Salcia Alice Jabana, the Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission of Asia and the Pacific. Amira, over to you.
Excellency Ambassador Ms. Maria del Carmen Squiff, Chair of the 59th session of the Commission on Social Development, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to join this interactive dialogue with you and senior officials today. Rapid economic progress has created prosperity and opportunity for billions of people in Asia and the Pacific. Yet, despite this remarkable progress, inequality remains a significant concern. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated the growing divide in many countries. With no means of alternative income, formal social protection system or savings, 218 million informal workers and their families in Southeast Asia and other sub-regions will be pushed deeper into hardship, reversing decades of poverty reduction gains. Furthermore, about 81 million jobs in the Asia-Pacific region were lost in 2020, and the large reductions in working hours push millions into working poverty, as per recent ILO data. The pandemic also has widened inequalities in digital connectivity and digital services. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I recognize that the Asia-Pacific region has become a global hub of innovation and technology. It has produced advances in the way information is shared and services are delivered. Emerging technologies provide opportunities to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of social protection. We have seen how modern information and communication technology, or ICT platforms, unified online databases, and mobile telephone technologies enhance the design and delivery of social protection schemes. It also addresses the needs of older persons, particularly regarding healthcare. These tools can be used to better understand and identify people's needs, help support accessibility and delivery, and strengthen trust in the system. Importantly, digital technologies have proven to be critical during the pandemic. Technology has helped to stem the spread of the virus, sustain daily life, support business continuity, ensure access to information and services, and keep people connected. Artificial intelligence and other digital technologies, if wisely harnessed, can change the way we live and work and help deliver from poverty to 1 billion people in the region who live on incomes below $3.2 a day. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as countries work toward using digital technology to provide potential solutions to today's challenges, we must also be aware of their potential risks. Digital technologies can increase inequality and create new socioeconomic vulnerabilities. Digital technologies can also threaten privacy and lead to abuse and discrimination, which can affect persons in vulnerable situations. Currently, only 40% of public government websites have accessible formats, despite roughly 690 million persons, or about 15% of the region's population, living with disabilities. Many of these vulnerabilities overlap, including gender gaps and rural-urban divide, having a compounding effect on inequalities and inequities. Despite the many advances in technology, not closing the digital divide between and within countries may mean that the region will not achieve the 2030 Agenda by 2030. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to highlight key policy messages for your further considerations today. First, let us focus on maximizing opportunities through robust public-private partnership. The private sector is the source of much innovation, which benefits from conducive and inclusive regulatory frameworks. Political commitment, the socio-economic context, and multi-stakeholders approach are key drivers to deliver optimal social, economic, and environmental results for everyone. Second, we must promote ecologically sound inclusion of underserved and marginalized groups in the digital world. This means extending the reach and benefits of digital technologies to all individuals and areas in need. This is critical in fostering a socially just transition toward sustainable development. We have to scale up investment in education, redesigning education systems with a greater focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or also known as STEM. Third, governments are encouraged to focus on strengthening greater cooperation at all levels. All actors must work together for the common good, from sub-regional and regional cooperation to facilitate knowledge sharing and build regional consensus to national and local levels. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in Asia and the Pacific, since 2015, ESCAP has worked with member states to develop the Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway by improving regional broadband connectivity, increasing international bandwidth for developing countries, lowering broadband prices, and bridging the digital divide. ESCAP remains committed to working with member states and development partners to leverage digital technologies in raising social development and well-being of all. We can only attain a socially just transition towards sustainable development with concerted action, commitment, and partnership. I wish you a very successful and fruitful discussion during the Commission for Social Development session. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Amida. Sorry for that little technical glitch there. And thank you again for that very excellent presentation and highlighting in particular some of the downsides of the digital revolution that we're all experiencing, including some of the threats to privacy and the potential for abuse and further discrimination, as well as the fact that even as our governments move more and more of our public services online, many of our government websites aren't fully accessible, which is a distinct disadvantage to those of our compatriots who are living with disabilities. I now invite Mr. Haolin Zhao, the Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union, to take the floor. We've all spoken about the increased importance of digitalization as part of the response to the crisis, and Mr. Zhao is uniquely well placed to speak to us about that. Mr. Zhao, over to you.
Okay, very good. Excellencies, dear colleagues, of course, all the participants. I'm very pleased to join my sisters, Alicia from ECLAC, Amida from UNSCAP, and another sister, Anita from UN Women. Together, with another man, we make some kind of gender balance here to talk about the social development. And I'm very pleased to be invited to join this excellent team to talk about ICT's contribution to the social development. I think that my sisters already mentioned that over the last decade, a lot of ICT development in their regions, like American regions, Asia Pacific regions, which made enormous contribution to facilitate the social economic development in their regions. I myself witnessed that one. That for example, for Latin America, when I was visiting some Central America regions, I noted that the internet has been already introduced to the region as early as in 1990s. However, the development of internet connections by the time when I visited them, 2012, still much low compared with world average. And then that the recent years we see a lot of development. And in Asia Pacific region, we also noted that this region has the biggest population of the world, and ICT development is quite different from one country to another. And this COVID-19 gave us very good lessons that we see the benefit of ICT to help people to fight against the COVID-19. But we also see the digital divide between those who already enjoyed the connections and those who have not been connected yet. So this COVID-19, give us a very good opportunity to see how can we work together to work better, to improve the situation of this digital connectivity. So I, from very beginning, when I started my role as Secretary General in 2015, I put the four eyes on as my priority. First eye, infrastructure. We needed to further extend our infrastructure to connect those not connected yet. We needed to bring new technologies to upgrade the current applications and technologies using by our customers with higher, more advanced technology like 5G, like Internet of Things these days. And this is the first eye. Second eye is investment. And the investment is very important for sure. If you don't have investment, you cannot get this task done. But we have to understand that at this moment, the investment is mainly coming from private sector. And public sector did not have enough public funds to invest in this. And also many countries leave this to private sector. I think that the situation is today, we have a lot of development, but we still have half population not connected online yet. Half population, entire world population not connected online yet. Why? Because they are in the poor area, in the remote area, not much profit for private investment. Therefore, we needed to have a good strategy to encourage investment for the connection. And then the third eye is innovation. We need to have a smart, innovative way to do our business. Not only talking about technology innovations, but I'm talking about the innovative policies to create a good environment to attract the investment. And of course, as Amira also mentioned that and Alicia also mentioned in their regions, a lot of innovative ideas, local applications developed by SMEs, by the local generation of young people. So this are absolutely true. And we have to mobilize all this together with the big companies to work for a better technology in the future. And then last I is inclusiveness. We have to have everybody included, and we should not leave anybody behind. And here, this 4 I's is absolutely, and then unfortunately, we still have some kind of public policy or perceptions, in my opinion, we needed to address seriously. As I mentioned, that we leave everything to the private sector may not be the best way. So that one, we have to create a good environment to attract the investment. And also, I think my colleague already mentioned that this situation gives us good lessons that if we leave every single ecosystem to do their business, everybody now try to use ICT to improve their efficiency. It may not be good enough. We needed to have a new idea to mobilize everybody come together to look at this issue, to have a national strategy for ICTs. And this is something I think that I highlighted last year at all occasions, that we needed to reconsider our business model, business directions. So that inclusiveness is absolutely important. Not only talking about those not connected yet in the remote area, in poor area, in the poorly connected area, but also even within the cities. I think my colleague already mentioned that the data divide between the different groups within the countries does not mean that between cities and the countryside. Even within the cities, you see different between those who are handicapped people, disabled people, and between women and men, and between those senior citizens who do not know how to use digital technology to order goods and to manage their life during this COVID-19 situation. So these are something that we really have to work together to create a good environment to increase the digital skills. And for the women, I think that my two sisters highlighted the important. I absolutely agree with them. And the women are very, compared with the men, I think that still it's a long way to go to get equality, to get balanced. And here, ITU worked with young women to create Equals project to promote this one. ITU also worked with UN ESCAP to launch the bigger project to launch several projects to encourage society to give women more opportunities to work. And we also work with ECLAC to promote the women's in the ICTs. And it's not enough. We have to strengthen further cooperation. I think that you want me to stop. Let me stop here. But anyhow, I'm very pleased to be with you at this session, and I'm at your disposal for any further, topic for discussion. I wish everybody a very successful meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gerard.
I cannot hear you.
So sorry. Still, after all months online, we still make that mistake. I'm very pleased at the way you presented the infrastructure, investment, innovation, and inclusiveness as a range of issues that have to be taken into account as we react and respond to this crisis and we move forward. And that, as you said, we have to reconsider our business models, take a new, more inclusive approach to overcoming the digital divide. I turn now to our next panelist, who's Ms. Anita Bhatia, the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Anita, you have the floor. I think you will have seen from the three preceding panelists that we all agree that this crisis has been a particularly damaging one for women, and we have to have them at the center of all our efforts to recover. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Elliot, and good afternoon, good evening, Excellencies. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today, and I'd like to thank Ambassador Maria del Carmen Squef for the invitation and for her leadership in convening this important panel on an issue of critical importance at this particular inflection point in history. We are facing, as previous panelists have said, an unprecedented crisis. But with this crisis comes an opportunity to build back not just better, but to build back equal. And for women and girls globally, the digital revolution represents one of the greatest opportunities to achieve gender equality and to enhance women's empowerment and resilience. The question is, are we in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that the digital revolution presents? And as we heard from previous speakers, the degree of investment that has been made in this and the gap that exists in the current digital infrastructure presents a real barrier to women being able to take advantage of the digital revolution. Not only is there a gap between rich and poor, there is a gap between men and women when it comes to digital technology. They do represent, these technologies, an unprecedentedly powerful lever to change women's lives, to facilitate their access to key skills, to information, to market opportunities, to finance, to assets, and for young girls to education. What we have seen through the pandemic is that the world is really divided into those who have digital access and those who don't. And those who do not have digital access are likely to suffer long-term consequences. As a young girl in a developing country where digital access is limited, not only is it difficult for the young girl to access education, it is also difficult for in a household to ensure access to perhaps the only computer in the house. We know that cultural norms are such that if there is a choice between the boy child and the girl child getting education, it will be the boy child. This is why we have seen a concomitant rise in child marriage, and this is why we have seen an alarming dropout in the number of girls who are going to school. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, we face the possibility of having an entire generation of girls who do not have digital access to education, of being uneducated. What are the implications of this? It could mean a generational impact in terms of access to educational opportunity, employment, and finally, and importantly, the realization of that young girl's full human rights. Gender-based inequality in digital technology is a major concern for UN Women and for all of you who are advocates of the gender equality agenda. And this is because significant gaps actually already exist globally for women to fully benefit from this. These gaps existed before the pandemic. They have been exacerbated terribly. The global gender gap in internet access is actually widening, and it is the largest among the LDCs, not surprisingly, where it reaches 31%. The global gender gap in financial inclusion has not changed since 2011. It reaches 9% in developing countries. So these are just a few indicators of the global gender gap between rich and poor. And when we look at these numbers and disaggregate them further by sex and gender, we see that there is actually still a very substantial gap. And this gap between men and women exists for cultural reasons, as I outlined previously, but it also exists because women are poorer than men. Poverty, ladies and gentlemen, is highly feminized. We know this, and this has implications for women's access to digital technology. I also want to highlight something that previous speakers also alluded to, and that is that the pandemic has actually exacerbated the risk of cyber violence. This is not something that we read that much about in the papers. Of course, we have been seeing everywhere, and all of us who are concerned about this issue have been publishing policy briefs and sharing data on the degree of the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women. But one of the things that really needs to be highlighted a lot more is that one of the lesser known, perhaps, impacts of the pandemic is the impact that we are seeing in terms of the rise of cyber violence and the challenges that cyber violence presents. This is a new kind of evil, and this is a new kind of problem, relatively new compared to other kinds of violence, and concerning given the digital gender divide that women and girls, once again, are at a higher risk for this form of violence. In the US, for instance, 2 out of every 10 young women between the ages of 18 and 29 have been harassed online. In the European Union, 1 out of 10 women report having experienced cyber harassment starting at the age 15. We know that in many parts of the world, these numbers are even higher. Now, the silver lining is that the pandemic may have, in fact, raised awareness of the extent of this problem and is therefore prompting more discussion about actual actions to prevent online violence and possibly the increase in the accessibility and the availability of services to those who suffer from it. Unfortunately, by and large, most measures that have been undertaken as a response to the pandemic and as part of stimulus recovery packages are not gender sensitive. Elliot, are you trying to tell me I need to finish?
Yes, please.
Yes, I will. And so I just wanted to close by saying that we know that gender has not been a front and a core priority or criteria in economic stimulus packages that have been rolled out in response to the pandemic. In fact, our work, along with that of UNDP's, shows that out of the gender-sensitive measures that have been taken by most countries in response to COVID-19, not gender-sensitive measures, the measures that have been taken by countries in response to the pandemic, only 20% of countries actually had a gender lens in these packages. As a result, issues such as digital technology are not receiving enough attention. Let me close there, Elliot, but I'll be happy to take questions should there be any. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anita. Let me turn now to our final panelist, Mr. Gerard Quinn, who is the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Mr. Quinn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to address you today. I'm very conscious that the very first Special Rapporteur on Disability, Bent Lindquist, was directly answerable to you at the Commission for Social Development, and I'm very happy to maintain that close relationship with the Commission. As many on this panel have already very eloquently said, we are at a very unique moment in history. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the accumulated disadvantages faced by many, including persons with disabilities and older people, but others too. We've made great strides in altering official policy and culture on disability and indeed on age. We've largely changed law and policy, but what we forgot is that the old ways of thinking remain embedded in how systems respond, and this was especially so during the pandemic. We all know we need to build back a much more resilient and inclusive future. And as we start to build back, we are also at another interesting inflection point in the history of humanity, with the beginning of a new technological revolution, a revolution that makes systemic change possible for the first time in a long time. While the underlying trends are almost inevitable, they do need to be properly harnessed, lest people with disabilities and older persons and others are left even further behind. In addition to the well-known digital divide, what else is happening and needs attention? I think 2 or 3 trends deserve our attention. First, the traditional social state is changing. The traditional way of delivering social services through large intermediaries has reached a limit of sorts. We have long dreamt of personalized services, restoring voice and power to the person, and we have long dreamt of giving the consumer power through individualized budgets. Things are now trending in that direction, especially with the onset of electronic platforms in particular to bridge supply and demand. These platforms will revolutionize the service scene in the next decade or so for people with disabilities and older persons, and indeed others. Sustainability to me in this context has to mean maintaining standards whilst making space for innovation. That is to say, innovation alongside inclusion. It has to mean avoid creating large intermediaries like online platforms, which could undermine the role of the state and potentially privatizing further social support. It has to mean the rigorous enforcement of competition law to forestall new platforms gaining too much control and power over the supply of support. And it has to mean ensuring that the social profit motive remains the strongest one. Sustainability here also means being careful not to generate any more precarious employment and being attentive to the situation of informal carers of persons with disabilities and older persons, surely one of the most neglected groups in the world that are mostly comprised of women and girls, a further example of the feminization of poverty in action. Secondly, regarding the trend of artificial intelligence and machine learning, it seems as if the terms of human coexistence are being rewritten. We're becoming the sum total of what we consume electronically. This in turn is reflected back in how systems respond and adjust to individual situations and indeed anticipate them without us even noticing. Those who consume less or who consume differently electronically will be treated differently electronically. This includes both persons with disabilities and older persons. It seems to me that encoded in machine learning are traditional ways of framing both age and disability. Machines, it seems, are just as capable of the naturalistic fallacy as humans, the assumption that whatever is what ought to be. It seems that machine learning is just in need of being purged of ableism and ageism as are humans. Sustainability in this context, to me, will mean resisting the crude determinism implicit in artificial intelligence, which reduces humanity to the measurable expression of the self and forgets the inner life of the self. And sustainability will mean weaning machine learning away from ableist or ageist assumptions and making express allowance for the diversity of humanity, which is one of its richest treasures. Finally, I'd like to remind you that the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy, adopted about a year ago, will support efforts across the UN family in making the system more accessible and inclusive for persons with disabilities and hopefully a large number of older people too. May I point particularly to the novel provisions in UNDIS on the need to adjust UN public procurement policy, purchasing social justice through procurement by setting, for example, minimum IT accessibility and other standards has been shown to work very, very well elsewhere in the work. I think the UN can leverage its consuming power to do the right thing. I look forward to the maximum use of this tool in the UN system for many different groups left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, older persons and persons with disabilities have been among the furthest left behind. New technology opens up brand new vistas for change, but we need to ensure that it does not carry forward old mindsets like ableism and ageism and leaves us even further behind. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quinn. And let me, sort of from a personal standpoint, express my thanks to all of the panelists for being so rigorously disciplined in observing the time limits, which now, of course, gives us the luxury of having a more expansive, interactive dialogue with the member states and the other participants in our session today. We've had excellent presentations that have highlighted some of the different facets and aspects that this crisis has revealed. We've spoken about the concept of the digital citizenship, and we've had key proposals from Alicia on how one can actually respond to some of the shortcomings in access to broadband and to connectivity, and in particular responding to some of the differences in the equipment of schools that has led to these differential outcomes in terms of education. We've heard from Armina about the importance of robust private-public partnerships in maximizing inclusive opportunities, including through a more robust regulatory framework and a multi-stakeholder approach, and that there is a need for greater government cooperation at the regional and sub-regional level as well to build up consensus on how we will manage not only the recovery, but the future articulated around the digital world. Mr. Zhao pointed out that there are 4 key elements of an approach to improving connectivity, and spoke of the need for a different approach, a different business model to address the digital divide. Anita Bhatia pointed out that that those without digital access are likely to suffer long-term consequences well beyond the impact of the crisis, even after we have resolved it, leading to this concept of perhaps digital poverty, which can go alongside other forms of poverty and lead to the further discrimination against women, women being both monetarily and digitally poorer than men. And she pointed to the appearance of a new phenomenon, or relatively new phenomenon, cyber violence, which once again exposes women much more to being victims than it does to men. And Mr. Quinn pointed to a very important point, which is that some of our older mindsets may actually have crept into this new technology, the machine learning, the artificial intelligence, the ageism and the ableism, which discriminates quasi-automatically, discriminates even further against older people, people with disabilities, and that we need to guard against that as we take advantage of the digital technologies in recovering from this crisis. We now have the opportunity, as I said, to engage in the dialogue part of our event this afternoon, and I do invite the delegations who wish to make comments and to pose questions to use the dedicated speaker request form, which is accessible on the chat board of the Interprify portal. You would make a request by completing the speaker request form, which will be open for the next few minutes. I'd like to also take this opportunity to remind anyone who wishes to intervene of the time limit of 3 minutes for your interventions. I have already my first 3 speakers, which are the distinguished representatives of Mexico, followed by China and Argentina. I give the floor first to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much to the distinguished panelists for their presentations. And we particularly would like to salute Madame Bárcena, always dealing with important issues in that commission. Things such as technology are part of the everyday life of people on the planet, and I think that what the Secretary General pointed out in his roadmap is to achieve universal connectivity by 2030, and this is being seen as one of the greatest goals that the UN can have, because all knowledge today goes through technology. We agree that there needs to be a genuine transition towards a more resilient and sustainable society, and we recognize the important role of digital technology in this when we promote social development and well-being of everyone. We need to reduce the digital differences that exist, and if we don't do that, we're going to see an increase in social differences as well. In our national policy of inclusion, we've tried to close these existing gaps. We have centres for digital inclusivity that are there to help develop digital capabilities, particularly for those in more vulnerable situations. And I see that UN Women made a very good presentation. We work with UN Women on programs of digital inclusion as part of the Secretary General's roadmap, and we're very happy to do that. I really wanted to bring to everyone's attention and table the question of what are the good practices that we should follow to achieve this universal digital inclusivity. In the Addis resolution, we created the online platform for good practices for SDGs when it comes to technological aspects. But that platform was hardly implemented at all last year. We need this platform to become a point of reference to identify good digital practices so that we can accomplish the SDGs and close this digital disparity that we see. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico and give the floor now to the distinguished representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their wonderful presentations. Digital technology indeed offer important tools for promoting the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I would like to make 3 points. First of all, we need to solve the digital divide between rural area and urban areas. Based on China's experience, digital technologies have provided strong support for poverty eradication efforts. At present, the number of rural netizens in China has reached 309 million. 98% of poor villages are connected to optic fiber networks, and all 832 poor counties have gained access to e-commerce. Over 85% of adults use online payment. It was thanks to the above-mentioned measures that local specialties from remote mountainous regions have become popular products online. China's rural online retail sales have grown from 180 billion yuan in 2014 to 1.7 trillion yuan in 2019, an 8.4-fold growth. Increasing income for millions of poor people. Second, we need to address the digital divide between the South and the North. As noted by the Secretary General's report, at present, 87% of the people in developed countries are online, compared with only 19% in the LDCs. Leaving no one behind means leaving no one offline. The international community should ensure that developing countries have the ability to build efficient, secure, and affordable ICT infrastructure, improve connectivity, and digital accessibility. Third, to make the best use of digital technologies, we need to enhance digital governance. Following a people-centered and fact-based policy orientation, we should encourage innovation, build mutual trust, foster an open, fair, just, and non-discriminatory business environment and maintain the supply chain security of global ICT products and services. That's why China proposed the Global Initiative on Data Security. By doing that, China supports the UN in playing a leadership role in discussing and developing rules for global digital governance to allow digital technologies to benefit more people across the world and build a digital community with a shared future. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of China. I turn now to the representative of Argentina, followed by Cuba. The distinguished representative of Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Moderator. Argentina would like to congratulate the presenters for their excellent briefings, and we'd like to put the following question. How should we approach the digital agenda from an intersectional approach? What examples of good practices could you provide that would guarantee full inclusion of women and girls and LGBT individuals and those with disabilities and older persons in terms of access to digital technologies, particularly in the context of the pandemic where we saw the whole digital revolution speed up? Thank you.
Representative of Argentina for that question. I turn now to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Moderator. Chair of the Commission for Social Development. My delegation would also like to welcome the panelists who have honoured us today with their very interesting statements, and particularly Ms. Alicia Bárcena, Executive Secretary of ECLAC. Given what's been discussed in this panel on the priority theme, my delegation would like to make the following question. How do unilateral coercive measures impact developing countries' access to measures such as these? These are illegitimate under the Charter of the United Nations and the purposes and principles of international law on access of developing countries to information and communication technologies and the well-being of affected peoples. I'm putting this question because my country, Cuba, has been the subject of this kind of unilateral coercive measure. The longest blockade of its history of 7 decades, and we deem this blockade by the US against Cuba our main obstacle in better and more access to ICTs and implementing these ICTs for social development for all in our country. Thank you very much, Moderator.
My thanks to the distinguished representative of Cuba. That was the last request for the floor from the member states. And so with that, I'd like to turn back now to the panelists, who I would ask to respond to what they've heard from the member states, but also what they've heard from their other co-panelists during the course of this afternoon's event. We would give you each about 5 minutes, please, to respond, to pose questions, or to answer the questions that have been put to us. And I'd like to start perhaps in reverse order to the initial presentations by turning first to Mr. Quinn. Mr. Quinn, you have the floor. 5 minutes, please.
And I'd like to thank the distinguished delegate from Argentina for an excellent question on intersectionality and particularly the intersectional approach to accessibility. I will say from the outset that that is the strongest way to make serious gains. If you've noticed that the EU Accessibility Act adopted about 2 years ago includes both older people and persons with disabilities. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has very novel provisions on electronic accessibility. And of course, older people are amongst the chief beneficiaries. And just today, there was discussion in the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights on progress toward drafting a convention on the rights of older people. What eventually happens, I expect that accessibility and digital citizenship issues will be emblazoned on that as a key thematic. I will just make one comment on our colleague from the ITU, and I think putting together in one phrase innovation with inclusion is a very significant way forward, and I suggest that creates very interesting imaginative space for all of us to occupy. I would reiterate my point that I made at the end of my formal comments, which is that we've got to be looking at new tools like procurement law to try and leverage market forces into the right space. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quinn. Let me turn now to Anita Bhatia from UN Women. Anita?
Can you see and hear me?
We can.
Thank you. And thank you to colleagues for excellent questions. I just want to reflect on one issue which perhaps we didn't pay adequate attention to in our discussion earlier today, and that is that the digital divide is both an enabler and a destroyer. It is an enabler when used well. We have seen that in some countries that had invested in digital infrastructure, it actually made it possible for women to benefit from some of the different instruments and policy actions that were undertaken by governments in response to the pandemic. I'm thinking here of the case, for example, of Togo, where mobile telephony was leveraged to enable cash transfers. I'm thinking of the example of my own country, India, where the fact that investments have been made in digital infrastructure and there is a digital ID system allowed the government to reach 200 million women with cash transfers. So this is a very good example of digital investments actually paying off in very tangible, concrete ways. At the same time, we saw that the lack of access to digital technology is resulting in many cases in a huge drop-off in female labor force participation. So we don't have all of the data on this yet, but the early evidence suggests that not only did women lose more jobs than men at the inception of the pandemic, but that they are coming back to work in fewer numbers after the, in spite of the reopening in some countries. As countries struggle to get back on their feet, we are noticing that women are not returning to work at the same level as men. And part of that has to do, of course, with the huge care burden that they are experiencing, but it also has to do with the fact that the nature of jobs is changing and the nature of employment is changing. And having digital access has now become critical for certain kinds of jobs where it wasn't before. So this transition from physical to virtual world and to working from home, or as one sometimes feels, living at work, is going to have consequences for female employment, which again, as I alluded to before, may not be temporary, but may result in permanent impacts on the composition and the size of the labor force, and ultimately on productivity and GDP, which is, of course, a great area of concern for development and particularly social development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Let me turn now to Mr. Hulin Zhao from ITU.
Gender issues and inclusiveness, as my friend Mr. Quinn just appreciated my point. And I think that, to have everybody online by 2030. So let me just talk about the gender issues. Gender issues is very serious in our ICT business. Well, we noted that there's a long time existing gap here. And for example, in 2012, when we had our World Radio Conference held in Geneva, among the total participation, 12% women, 12% only. And then in 2019, when we had our last World Radio Communication Conference, among 3,600 delegates, we had 18%. So already 6% increased, but still far away from the balanced. And this, we noted this for a long time. So the ITU looked at the special day, the girls, women in ICT. That is the last Thursday of April every year. So we organize this event to promote women and girls in ICT. And I'm very pleased to share with you that today I think that we have more than 170 countries organize such kind of an event. But even so, still, in the end, we see not much progress. And I myself is so-called a champion of Geneva-based diplomat group, and they asked me to do something. So I promised them to send out my circular letter to members, always including a sentence to encourage our members to send more ladies to our meetings. And we also organized our ICT, girls in ICT together with UN ESCAP last year. And I don't know whether you know that tomorrow is a very special day for women in science. So we take all opportunities, try to encourage this, but unfortunately still far away from what we could be satisfied. I can tell you, in some countries I visited, in the universities, a very big university, they're decade long, there's no women, girl students for science and technologies, for mathematics. So that it's very worrying. In some other country, very few. For example, I visited Kazakhstan 2 years ago. At their top lab, all the advanced projects they have always have lady researchers inside. So that is good. So we have to work hard to encourage more women to join the ICT business. So that is something I would like to talk. And then for the inclusiveness, to include the handicapped people, ITU also noted that about 10 to 15% of our population are disabled people. So we have to work hard to try to help them to enjoy the normal life with the new technologies. And we encourage our modern companies to put this seriously. And I'm very pleased that we have a lot of tools now could assist our blind people, mute people, and handicapped people to enjoy the life. But that one, still we have to work hard to improve the technologies to provide more benefit to this group of people. And for the connection by 2030, I can tell you, I was very much embarrassed in 2019 at one of important IT event, asked, challenged by public, saying that Secretary General, you talked about have everybody be connected. Can you tell us when you can reach that goal? So that is really, challenge to me. And then I hesitated to find the proper time frame. But then they immediately asked, what about 2030? Then I answered, I said, unfortunately, I don't think that will be easy to reach that goal by 2030, because today we have half population not connected yet. While in recent years, the improvement of this connectivity is much, much slow now. And then, if we see the last 2 years, only 1%, 1.5%, I think the last time is 1.5%. And if we continue this speed to improve our connectivity, you need another at least 20 to 30 years. So that within next 10 years to reach that goal is not easy. However, last year, Secretary General Mr. Guterres publicly announced that he would like to see by 2030 everybody be connected, also connected with affordable price to use the modern technologies. So this is something very ambitious. But I discussed with many members, and we believe if we all mobilize, we all work together, we can reach that goal. But anyhow, we have to change our business mode. We can change our mind, business mind, so that to encourage everybody to work on this ICT development. Because, in my opinion, if we do not have ICT available to people to reach the goal of SDG by 2030 is almost impossible. And today we have a chance, and we noted that everybody recognizes the importance of ICT. Everybody try to help to promote ICT development, and particularly broadband connections and connectabilities. I think that China gave us a very good example, and we just heard from them. They connected their villages. And they connect the villages, not only just the connected villages, they connect the villages by optical fiber. And this is a very good backbone and very new technology driven connections. So that one is quite good. What China can do, I think that the other country can do as well. So that we have to encourage investment to be put in this area to make sure that we have a good infrastructure to connect everybody. So that I would you want me to stop? Let me stop here.
I'll pass on to the next speaker. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting points in particular about the investment that is necessary to reach full connectivity. And I turn now to Armida Alis-Jabana from ESCAP. Armida, you have the floor. I understand from the organizers that ESCAP is not available, may have fallen offline. In that case, let me turn to Alicia Barcena from ECLAC. Alicia, would you take the floor, please?
Spanish, if I may, to deliver my final messages I want to post for everybody. Número uno, creo que
First of all, I think it's very important to understand that the pandemic has shown us that there are urgent emergency actions, and then there are medium and long-term actions. We need to divide up what we need to do so that we can tackle those digital solutions which are necessary in terms of the pandemic to contain it. What do we do for online education, electronic health, telework, e-commerce, digitization? These have increased 350% at least. And then what do we do with regard to structural limitations, which Lynn was speaking about? That is access to connectivity because of income levels, internet speeds which are not enough, digital divides. And I want to refer to something, Elliot, which people haven't talked about yet, which is the low level of digitization of production processes, livelihoods. We have been focusing, at least in my region, on internet for consumption and much less digitization of production. And I think that's very important. So I would propose some very specific lines of action. First of all, universalize access for an inclusive digital society. This does require a certain broadband connection speed. That's true, because otherwise there won't be access to more sophisticated elements. And we also have to achieve these new tools, which our colleague was referring to, so as to incorporate everybody, Indigenous peoples, rural people, people with disabilities, and so on. We believe that in the short term, the cost of universal inclusion for the basic basket is 1% of the GDP. We believe that we need to promote the productive transformation. This is fundamental. We need to digitize value chains, innovation, and strengthen the digital ecosystem. Promoting trust and digital security. China was saying this. We need regulatory frameworks with norms for use of data for businesses and governments with privacy and cyber security. We need to strengthen digital cooperation on a regional level. And here I want to talk about what the ambassador of Mexico was saying. Mexico did extraordinary work at the head of ECLAC. And I think we need to take a leap forward so as to create regional and sub-regional digital structures and networks and access to broadband on a regional level. But this requires a governance model, a governance where the state, society, and the market are participating, and we need to move towards a state of well-being which is digital. This is what we need. So we have to achieve connectivity, availability, channels of communication for emergencies, management of traffic, protection of the consumer, and something which I don't want to leave out, and which I was saying at the beginning, there is a lot of work which cannot be done digitally. There are many jobs which can't be done digitally. Care work, what women do, those who care for older people, ill people. We can't digitalize that kind of thing. Robots can't do that. Even robots couldn't. So we need to protect employment as well. And the economy of care needs to be a public good which is paid for, remunerated appropriately. So women, not only women, need to be given the right pay for this. And we need to have a more inclusive education system as well, because now we are leaving many children out. And finally, dear Elliot, what I wanted to say was that what we need urgently is for the big digital companies and businesses, the big winners from this pandemic, must pay taxes. Taxation of the digital economy is an international challenge. Digital businesses have increased their value on the market. They are models, business models of a global reach, and they need to respond so that there can be a multilateral response and a contribution to the global economy, the real economy, by these big multinational companies. Just as we're seeing with vaccines, developed countries will be vaccinating themselves and developing ones not. This could happen as well with the digital economy. We cannot allow that. Having two worlds would be impossible. I think the delegate of China said, leave no one offline, and I loved that. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for having me, Ambassador. It's been a pleasure, and we are all, I think, committed. And what the countries have all said was very relevant. As Ambassador Sandoval was saying, we need to have an observatory with all the positive experiences that we could learn from this pandemic so as to include everybody in the digital world in the best way possible.
Thank you very, very much, Alicia. And I extend my thanks and the thanks of everyone participating in the event to all of the panelists. It's been extraordinarily comprehensive, the discussion. I myself have heard things that I've never heard before, and that will influence the way I think. If I may allow myself, Madam Chair, just 1 minute to remark on a couple of things that I intend to take away with my from this event and try to bring into my work in UNDESA. I was particularly gripped by the idea of innovation with inclusion, that we have to keep this in mind as we move forward. As we recover, we have to make sure that we respond to some of the weaknesses that have led to this difficulty and this hugely inequitable situation we face today. I was also seized by the fact that as we move into this new digital world and take advantage of all these technologies, we have to bear in mind the danger that some of our old mindsets, and this is Mr. Quinn's point, some of our old mindsets might creep into the technology itself and perpetuate some of the discriminatory behavior that we are trying to eradicate. And we know that the digital revolution is affecting not just the response to the crisis, but will be the basis for our recovery and for our future. And that, as Alicia pointed out, we have to digitalize not just our consumption, not just our information, but also the production that we undertake. But in doing so, we should never lose sight of the fact that there are some activities that are critically important, but that cannot be digitalized. And we want to make sure that we don't create a two-class society. I think one of the panelists referred to that with regard to those activities that cannot be taken online, even though we must all strive to ensure that no one is left offline. And I think that that is a critical point, that we have to make sure as well in our recovery that everyone is brought into a position where they can take advantage of these new digital technologies. It's not just a matter of connectivity, it's also a matter of access to the infrastructure. And it's a matter as well of having the education that people will need to be able to take advantage of digital technologies and use them to improve our well-being and our standards of living in as equitable a manner as possible. So, Madam Chair, I want to thank you for the opportunity to have participated in the event. I want to thank again our panelists and the interventions from the member states which have guided our discussion. And with that, Madam Chair, I hand the floor back to you. Thank you very much.
Muy bien.
Thank you. We have reached the end of this interactive dialogue with senior officials of the United Nations system on the priority theme. And I would like to thank the moderator, Mr. Elliot Harris, for skillfully guiding our discussion. I would also thank the distinguished panelists and the delegations for actively participating in an interesting exchange of views. As a number of people said during this session, new forms of measuring poverty in the basic basket must include digital inclusion. Some ideas I wish to underscore and which are of particular interest to us and worth highlighting are the need for digitalization, as Ms. Barsine was saying, to feed also into production processes and throughout the various stages of the process. We also think it's important to highlight the issue that the big winners for the moment from digital changes pay taxes. And why? So that they can contribute to having there being better access. This was one of the things that all the panelists mentioned. So with these fundamental ideas, we come to an end of this panel. This pandemic has shown us how fragile we are and shown the need to build bridges between persons, between nations and between regions. And that is why this Commission for Social Development has such an important role, because it does build bridges between different stakeholders to address urgent issues for our countries and for our peoples. As Pope Francis was saying, fraternity is the true remedy for the pandemic, and there are many ills that have hit us. Fraternity and hope are like medicines which the world now needs alongside the vaccines. I'd like to say now that the Commission will resume its general discussion. That is the statements from each of the delegations or the heads of delegation on agenda items 3A and B tomorrow, Thursday the 11th of February at 10 a.m. on this platform. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.
Bueno, a ver.